Hello, everyone, and we're live. So, good afternoon. We're going to be starting the live in a couple of minutes, just give more time for people to arrive. But we have in the live today Elaiza. You can say hi.
Hello.
We have Craig, Colin, Alessandro, and Will. So the whole crew is here today. And we're going to be talking about PDF generation with D365, Power Automate, and custom connectors. So I reckon that is going to be cool.
I hope so.
I know.
When Wagner asked me, I was a bit nervous because I was just like, oh, I don't know. But yeah.
Bunch of Azure guys and girls looking at that kind of stuff, right? And I said, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Plus, custom connectors is something that is really going to connect, no pun intended, with the audience, because you're going to be using that not just on Power Automate, which some of us might need to learn and leverage more, but also from Azure Logic Apps, right? So that's why I was excited about that specific one, because it still highlights the Power Automate. That is something that I wanted to bring, but also show something that can be applied outside just Power Automate for the guys that are hardcore Logic Apps developers out there. Cool. So I think we already have 11 people connected. We should be, let's start officially.
Okay.
So welcome officially, everyone, to August 2020 for the Auckland Connected System Group. We're going to be talking today about the application with D365 templates and Power Automate custom connectors. It's a mouthful, but we're going to know a little bit more about what it is soon. Just again, a little bit about us. We talk over. We've been organizing events, including the Global Integration Bootcamp, since it started in 2017, I think, or 16. The whole leadership team is here today, apart from Mike. We have Craig Hayden, Colin Gigraf. Mike is not with us today. I'm here talking to you guys. Alessandro Moura and Will Valida. As always, we ask you, if you want to help, you could volunteer for a talk. We could suggest topics that you want to hear about, so we can try to find more people. I think that Power Automate was on the list last time that we run survey. And you can raise your hand for to help with organization. Will did that 2 or 3 months ago, and thanks for that, Will. If you wanted to follow us every time that I posting something about new events or some interesting information, we are posting and referencing the Auckland System User Group Twitter tag that is at ACSUG_NZ. Finally, if you want to subscribe to our Twitter YouTube channel, right? You can find that on that tag, sorry, on that URL, bit.ly/ACSUG-channel. And all of those presentations we actually pushing into the channel. So you have that offline if you wanted to refer, to watch it again, or to point it out to people. So on everyone that is doing live events or streaming today saying, please go there and subscribe. What is the show today? As I said, it's like we're going to be talking about auto PDF generation with D365 templates and Power Automate custom connectors. Okay, who's going to be presenting today is the one and only Elaiza Benitez of the What the Flow fame. Elaiza is a fellow consultant at the D365 team at Theta and is a business solution MVP. And also blogger, vlogger, and awesome first. Some legends. Craig, do you want me to talk again about why we have the legends?
No, it's okay. I'm quite all right. I think everyone's
okay,
tuned
no,
in and knows
worry.
about it.
I'm going to talk about it. The legends was created when Craig missed the first presentation since the inception, since he started to organize the group, right? So we never let him forget about that. I think it was actually the only one that he missed.
There's just that one session I missed.
Exactly. And because of that, we try to bring like something new or something that is interesting about this session that is happening. So on that one, Elaiza just told us that is the first time that she's presenting to an Azure audience. She's usually
pretty nervous.
And on the other hand, is our first presentation centered on Power Automate, and it's something that we always wanted to bring. All right. So without further ado, I'll let you share your screen, Elaiza.
Okay.
And start working on your stuff.
Okay, can you see my screen?
We can just add here. Okay, and I'm sending that live now.
Okay, cool.
So it's all yours.
Cool. Thanks, Wagner. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, it's my first time. I don't know why I'm nervous. I usually get nervous before I do presentations, but I think that's just how I normally roll. So as Wagner said, I'm Elaiza. I'm based out in Wellington, so I work in the Dynamics 365 team. I started out with Microsoft Dynamics CRM4, so that was back in 2009. So yeah, if you want to flatter me with comments on how young I look, feel free to do so. But yeah, today I'm really excited because I get to share with you all how you can create a custom connector for Power Automate to extend the capabilities of Dynamics 365. And what I'll be showing you is how we're going to use Azure AD as the identity provider for authentication. Now, before we get started, make sure you join in on the conversation on Twitter. Make sure you do use the official hashtag of ACSUG and Z. Feel free to tag me or follow me on Twitter, and if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I'm cool with that as well. Okay, so for the agenda today, I thought I would talk about the use case so that you understand the business context of this flow that I'm going to be showing you in Power Automate. And then I'm going to talk about one of the new Dynamics 365 API requests that was released last year, which is what I'm going to be calling in this solution today. And then I'm going to talk about the process, so the end-to-end process, followed by the components that the flow and Power Automate will use. And then I'm going to talk about how I'm going to break it down so all of you can follow, because I know that not everyone in the user group today would be familiar with Dynamics 365, so I'm just going to try go slow and make sure that you're all understanding of what I'm trying to basically show you today. So the use case is, as a customer, I want to receive a text receipt of my purchase in an email so that I have confirmation of my purchase. So the whole idea of this flow is to automatically generate a PDF once an invoice has been basically updated to paid, and that PDF needs to be attached to an outbound email, and that outbound email is going to basically be sent to that customer. So in terms of the new Dynamics 365 API request, the team released it probably around June last year, where they enabled end users to be able to create PDFs directly in Dynamics 365. So this was a bit cool because previously we didn't have this functionality, and so now they provided a new API that can either generate the PDF directly in the record, or you can generate and send that PDF to the customer, but that's all manual. So if you want to automate it, then this is where something like Power Automate comes in handy. So in terms of the process, as I mentioned, the end user is going to update an invoice to paid, and that will then trigger a flow in Power Automate, and then it's going to go ahead and generate that PDF, and then it's going to send it out to the customer as a file attachment. So the components that I'm going to be using in my flow today is a Word template. So in Dynamics 365, we can generate Word templates that surface data from a record in Dynamics 365, which is pretty cool. This is unique to Dynamics 365. And I'm going to call that PDF API request. And I'm going to do that through a custom connector with custom actions. Now, the reason why I'm using a custom connector is so that we can call that API. Previously, if we didn't have Flow or Logic Apps, we'd have to do it by code. And so by using a custom connector or not using any code, it's pretty much configurable, and you can then associate that to what we call a solution. So then that solution can be deployed into a target environment. So you would go from your source environment where you're building in, such as dev, and then you would move it across into UAT or production. And then lastly, I'm going to use the CDS connector to interact with other Dynamics 365 records. So in Power Automate, in flows, we have what we call connectors, and there's a whole bunch of connectors for SharePoint, Microsoft Word, Excel, CDS. Those of you who do know about Logic Apps, it's pretty much the same principles. Okay, so in terms of the breakdown, I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. So the first one is I'll show you how to create a Word template in Dynamics 365. And then in part 2, I'm going to show you the fun stuff, which is how to create your custom connector. And this is where I'm going to hop into the Azure portal. And then part 3 is showing you how it's going to work end to end in terms of that end user experience. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of my PowerPoint, and now we're basically just going to jump into the different environments, and let's get going. I was going to say let's get dirty, but that's not appropriate. So yeah, okay, cool. So in here, what you're seeing is a Power Platform Admin Center. So this will show me all the environments that are associated to my tenant that I have access to. And so to create a new Word template, you simply select your environment and you head to settings. And in here, it's going to give you a bunch of options. So the one that we want is document templates, which lives under templates. And when I click on this option, it's going to open up a new browser tab, and it's going to show me all the templates that are available today in this particular instance of Dynamics 365. So right off the bat, you can see that there's a whole bunch of templates. So the way templates work in Dynamics 365 is that you have 2 types. You have Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. The one that I'm going to be using today is Microsoft Word, so that will act as the foundation of the PDF. Because as we all know, when you want to create a PDF, it needs to use something. So it needs to have a foundation before it can, come out as an output as a PDF. So in this scenario, we're using Microsoft Word. So if you want to upload a template, there's a button up here called Upload a Template. But the first thing that we need to do is create a brand new template record. So if I click on New, it's going to ask me what type of template I want to create. So I'm going to create a Word template, and then in here, it's going to show me all the entities. So entities in Dynamics 365 are essentially tables that I can select. And so the one that we're using today is the invoice entity. So as I mentioned, in the use case, it will be when an invoice is updated to paid, where we want to generate that PDF. So once I click on invoice, I can then head over to the next step. So in this step of the wizard, this is where I can define the data that I want to surface in the Word template. So in Dynamics 365, it's going to show me all related entities in the form of one-to-many, many-to-one, and many-to-many. So in my scenario, what I want to do is grab information about the contact and account that it's linked to. And I also want to bring across what we call the invoice line items. So in other words, you know, like when you purchase something online, if you buy multiple products, when you get your tax receipt, you know, you see the lines of what you bought. So that's essentially the same concept in here. So I'm going to select invoice line, and that's it. Those are the three types of records that I want to bring across as well. So now when I click on download template, it will now generate a Word template that I can open and start styling. So we'll just give it a few more seconds. So this is that Word template now. And one of the things that you do need to do is enable the developer tab in your Microsoft Word. So I already have it enabled. And then there's an option in here called XML mapping pane. So when I click on this, this will now allow me to connect with Dynamics 365. So you'll see here that there's a URL option in here and it references Dynamics 365. So when I select this, it will now load the relationships that I have defined. So invoice is at the parent level. So if I scroll further down, we'll see invoice details, invoice customer account, and the contact. So then what we can start doing is start creating our template. So for example, I can type in things like tax receipt, invoice ID, and so now I can reference my fields from the invoice entity record. So what I'm doing right here is I'm inserting what we call a content control. So basically you right click and you select insert content control and you select plain text. And so what this content control is doing is that it's mapped to that attribute in that entity, so that field in that table. And when you generate this Word template from a Dynamics 365 record, it's going to pull across the value of that field based on what you've defined in this Word template. So then if I want to do something else like insert a table, I can do that. Let me just put some other details. So let me just put address just to show you what it will look like. So if I want to pull through the contact address, I simply head over to the contact definition and I can bring over address line 1. So again, I just right click, do plain text, and then if I want to pull through the postcode as well, I can do that. And then in terms of the table, line items, you can go ahead and define your table as well. So it's just pretty much what you're used to already today with Microsoft Word. So I can call this the item. I can then say what the quantity is and then what the price is. I'm just making this up. And so if I want to map the fields, it's the same process. So this time I'm going to move up to invoice details and we're going to pull through the product name. Let me just look at my notes 1 second. Oh, it's called product ID name. Okay. Cool. And then the quantity is quantity. So it's all pretty much straightforward. It's pretty much click, right click, and select the content control. So the last one is price, which is price per unit. Okay. Cool. So if you want to do a continuous row, so the thing is with line items, it's a one-to-many relationship, right? So if I just left it as this, it's only going to show a single row. So if you want to show multiple rows, because a text receipt can have more than one line item, you highlight the row and then you right click on the relationship definition and then you select repeating, and then it will go and continuously repeat the rows based on the number of line items it has. And then you can go ahead and style it. So if you wanted to make it bold, let's say make this bigger, you can do so as well. You can even change the color if you want. And so what I'll do now is hit save, and that has now created our Microsoft Word template. I do have a better one that I have styled, which I will show you. So now the next step is to upload that template that you've just go ahead and styled into Dynamics 365. So I'm creating a new template. I'm now selecting that Word template that I've just created, click on upload, and now it's already, excuse me, created it. I have a bit of a cough at the moment, so if I cough every now and then, please excuse me. So here's that invoice record. So as you can see, it's just created it. One tip from me is, based on the file name of your Microsoft Word document, it's going to use that as the value for the record. So make sure you name it beforehand. So just to show you what that will look like in terms of the invoice. So let me just refresh this. So now I'm in the invoice record and I'm going to generate that invoice that we had just, that Word template that we just created. So here's a list of Word templates, and so the one that I just created was this one, but I'll show you one that I've actually styled better. And this will automatically pull through the values of that invoice record. So as you can see, that's the Word template. So that was part one. And before I move on to the custom connector, these are the new features of Dynamics 365 in terms of that PDF API request. So you can see that when I click on Create PDF, it will show the Word templates that I have uploaded in my Dynamics 365 instance. And if I want to email as a PDF, when I select that invoice that we had, the Word template that we had just created, what will happen behind the scenes is that it's going to create an email activity record, and it's going to associate a PDF that it's generated behind the scenes to that email. But as you can see, that's a manual step. So what we actually want to do is automate it. So in terms of Power Automate or the Power Platform, when you want to create a custom connector, and if you're using something like Dynamics 365, the first thing that we need to do is create what we call an app registration. And I'm sure those of you who have done this before are familiar with it. So basically you head over to the Azure portal and you create a brand new app registration. So I'll click on new registration and I'll show you what that's like. So I just give this a name and I click register. So now that's creating my app registration, and it's automatically created a bunch of IDs. So there's two more things that I need to do first. And one of them is I need to enable the API permissions for Dynamics 365. So this is the one I want. And then I tick this and I click on add permissions. Cool, so that's one step done. The second step is to create what we call a client secret. And here it is. So I'm just going to copy this. Oh, I don't want to delete it. No. Okay, so I'll just copy this and we'll get back to it later. Cool. One thing that I do want to point out is if I go back to overview, there's something in here called a redirect URI. This is something that we need to go back and update once we've created my custom connector in Power Automate. Okay, so let's head over to Power Automate. I hope that's everything that I need to do. I'm pretty sure that's everything that I need to do for the app registration. Okay, so in Power Automate, you want to make sure that you're in the correct environment. So to double check that you're in the correct environment, click up here on the right and select the one that you do want. Ooh, I think I should be in this one. Sorry. Let me just double check. 1 second. Yes, this is the right environment. Okay, so to create your custom connector, head over to the Power Automate maker site. If you want to get to it from Office 365, you should see it in here. And then you want to head over to Data and select Custom Connectors. So what we're going to do is create a brand new one. And I'm going to select the option Create from Blank. There are other options that you can select as well. I haven't tried Postman yet. I've always created it from blank, but yeah, I guess I can try it one day. So I'll just give this a name as well. Actually, I want to call it, oh yeah, actually no, that's fine. Okay, so now I've just given it a name. The next thing that we want to do is go ahead and build this all out. So in here, you can give it a background color. You can upload an icon. So I'm going to upload a pineapple icon. I really like pineapples. I'm obsessed with them, both the fruit and the object. I have pineapple cushions, pens, whatever you name it. Oh, does it not like the hash? No.
And pineapple connectors now.
Oh, it doesn't like it. Okay, that's okay. All right, so then basically you can give it an icon, and the icon is important because when you go into Power Automate and you build your flow, this is the icon that you're going to see that represents your custom connector and your actions, which you'll see later on. So in terms of the host, it is pretty much my Dynamics 365 instance, but without the HTTPS. So I'm just going to paste it in here. I just have it ready on the side. And then we can go ahead and click Create Connector. And then in the next step is where we define Azure ID as the identity provider. So now this is telling me that it has successfully been created. So if we scroll down, you can click on security, or up here in the breadcrumb, you can click security as well, and it will take you to that next step. Okay, so this is one of the next cool bits that we could do. So in here, my authentication type is OAuth 2.0. And in the next step, that's where I can select Azure AD as my identity provider. And so in here, we've got the client ID. So if I go back to my app registration, I simply copy this value, the application client ID, head back to my custom connector and paste. And then with that client secret that we generated from earlier, I can paste it in there. And then the only final bit that we need to do is the resource URL, which is essentially the Dynamics 365 URL. So what I mean by that, let me just quickly show you, is basically your instance URL for Dynamics 365. Scope is fine, and so now when we click Update Connector, that will go ahead and create the and store the security details that we've just entered. And now this is an important step, the redirect URL. So what we need to do is copy this value, head back to my app registration, and we want to paste it into here. If you miss this step, when you do your testing, it will throw an error. So it's important that we do this. So I'm going to select add a platform, select web, and paste that value in there, and select configure, and that's it. Okay, so back in the custom connector wizard, we can then go ahead and head to the definition. I'm going to click update connector. I'm one of those paranoid people that needs to continuously click save to make sure that I haven't missed anything, because I guess everyone in here has probably had that experience where something's crashed or something's closed down and you're like, oh, I never clicked save. Yeah, so that's me. Okay, so now we get to the fun part where we can go ahead and create actions. So actions in flows is basically allows you to configure your flow where you could call different API requests. So the first action that I'm going to create is one that will call that PDF API request. So what we want to do is click on new action, and I'll call this generate PDF. And then for the operation ID, I'll just call it generate PDF as well. And then in here is where I can start creating the JSON payload for that API request. Okay, so the method that I'm going to use today is post because we want it to do something. And the URL that I am going to use is, let me just head to Visual Studio Code, is this one. So this is the API request that will allow me to create that PDF. So if I just paste that in here, and then in terms of the JSON payload, here's something I prepared earlier. So this is what it looks like. So basically this is a give me the entity type code for the entity that I want to call. So basically one of the cool things about CDS and Dynamics 365 is that I like to call them our ancestors who came before me that built the product. Basically created a whole bunch of APIs that developers could call. And so one of the APIs that is made available is allowing us to basically understand what the entity definitions are, so that when we do want to do some coding or development, we can just grab the value straight away. So this is saying that the object type code for the invoice is 1090, which is why I reference it in here. And then in this, in the properties in here, this is basically saying that we're going to call the word template, and the word template that I want to use has this ID, and I also want to apply this to this particular invoice record. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to dump it into here, and I click on import, and we're pretty much good to go. So if I just click update connector, that will now create that action. And then if I go to the next step, oh yeah, and so it will show you anything that you've done wrong in here. So basically I haven't done these two things properly, but that's okay. That's not going to stop me. So now the fun part is performing a test. And that's one of the things that I love about custom connectors, is that you can test any of your actions or your triggers that you create in your custom connector without having to leave the Power Automate Maker site, if that makes sense. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just creating a connection so that I can do the test. So I'm just gonna click accept here. And the important thing here is that if I didn't apply this redirect URI, in this step, this is where it's going to fail, like some error is going to be thrown. So just FYI. Okay, so now I can do some testing in here. So I'm just going to copy the values from my sample code. And we're going to grab this ID. And then in terms of the selected records, I'm going to copy this values in here rather than this one, because one of the things that the API request expects is the square brackets and the double quotes. So it's pretty much saying, give this to me in an array of strings, if that makes sense. If I had put it up here as part of the definition, when we were creating that the sample request, it would have failed, but I need to include it as part of the actual test. So let me just paste that in here. So now if I click on test operation, please don't give me any 400 errors. Yes, it was successful. Cool. If there was a problem, it will throw like 400. I can't remember the exact number, but in here we can see that it's successfully executed and we've got a response back. And so basically this property in here in the JSON response is base 64 encoded, and so it would have generated that PDF. So that's one action. There is one more action that we need to do, and that is to do with creating the file attachment of the PDF and then associating it to an email record. So we're going to create another new action, and I'll just call this email file attachment. And the reason why I decided to create a new action as well, rather than using how it works out of the box, is that the CDS connector for emails and Flow, they don't, well, okay, it does work, but not in the way that I want it to, where if I do use the action, it will throw an error because it's saying that there's a field that's mandatory, but in terms of practical sense, it doesn't need to be mandatory, so I'm kind of bypassing it. I do explain it in a blog post, which I will share, by the way. So by doing it through the API request, I know that I can do it in a single action without having to do some like workarounds just to get it to work. Because sometimes out of the box doesn't cut the cheese, and you kind of need to do something extra to make it work in the way that you want it to. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the API that will create that email attachment. So I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. So thanks again to our lovely Dynamics 365 ancestors who thought about this in terms of making sure that there are APIs for everyone to call long term so that we can do magical things with Dynamics 365. And so then if I go back to Visual Studio Code, I'll just grab my sample payload in here. Before I exit out of this, let me just explain it. So in this payload, basically what we're saying in here is that we're going to we're going to associate a file to this activity, and the activity that we want is basically the activity that has this ID, and the object type code is email. The body is base 64 encoded, and then we can give it a file name as well as a subject. So that's what that payload is for the API API request. And I'm going to click import, and then that looks pretty good. So I'm going to click update connector, and then we're going to go ahead and test. Okay, so now I can test my second action. So any of your actions that you create in your custom connector will appear here when you're testing. And so the next thing that we can do is perform that test. So if I go back in here and just grab the values for the properties, this is email. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do here is encode some string. So I'll say, hello, Auckland. Let's automate, and let's grab the base 64, which is this. This is something I use, by the way. My workmate Rex showed me this website, and I was like, oh, I never knew you could do this. So kudos to him. Okay, so that's the base 64 encoded. Sure, we'll call it hello world as well. Okay, so now I'm going to test my action. And again, please let the demo gods be kind to me, and they have. Woohoo! Okay, so the status is 204, and just to show you that the file created. So here's that email record that I associated that text file to. And so because that API request executed successfully, we should see a text file appeared here. So if I click refresh, we'll see it. And just to show you that it actually does say what I did right, it should say, hello, Auckland, let's automate. So we know that that's working. So that's a good test. So that's it in terms of the custom connector. So that was part 2. Now the finale is showing you how this all works end to end and what the end user experience is. So I'm going to head to my own instance and show you my flow that I've built. So this is where the magic happens. Oh wait, sorry, I forgot to show you something that was important. One second. So just to show you that the custom connector can now be called, so you should see a pineapple. We'll go ahead and just create a brand new flow. I'm just going to call this whatever. And so then in here, there's an option called custom, and we can see my custom connector. And so as soon as I select my custom connector, we could see my 2 actions that I had created as well as tested. And so now I can use those actions in my custom connectors whenever I want to build a flow that uses the generate PDF and creating that email attachment. Okay, so this is my other environment where my real flow actually lives in. So in here, we have what we call a trigger. So every flow by default needs a trigger. So what's going to execute this flow? And as I mentioned, the use case is when that invoice is updated to paid. And in here is where we can define the different trigger conditions. So as you can see, there's a bunch of options, and basically you select one and then you define the entity that you want this trigger to be executed from. So in my use case, it's invoices, and then you also have the scope. So scope pretty much defines whether it's applicable to everyone, so in other words, the whole organization, or whether it should just be limited to a user. So that's something nice that you can define as well when you're working with Dynamics 365 or CDS. So this is what we call a CDS trigger / CDS actions, which is what this icon represents. And then you can also define it to only execute based on certain fields. So I'm saying that I only want this to be triggered when the status reason is updated, and I need that status reason value to equal paid. And so this is what the paid value is underneath it all. Cool. So then the other thing that I'm doing is retrieving a queue. So one of the cool things about CDS and Dynamics 365 is that you can send emails from a queue instead of a user. So a queue in CDS or in Dynamics 365 is essentially an Exchange shared mailbox. So the queue is synchronized to an Office 365 shared mailbox. So you define that in the Exchange admin center of Office 365. And then once those two are hooked up, it'll basically act as the sender of the emails in CDS and in Dynamics 365. So in here, I'm saying grab me the queue that is the no reply queue. And then from there, my next action is to create a, excuse me, a brand new email activity record. So in here, I'm saying that I want the sender to be the queue. So this is where I'm referencing my queue record that it would have grabbed from here. And then I'm saying send it to the contact of the invoice. And so this is referencing the contact based on the invoice that triggered this flow. And if I just expand that option, we can see that I can also define a subject. And if I scroll up, I can also associate the email back to the invoice. So this will all make sense when I, excuse me, show you the record in Dynamics 365. Oh yeah, and you can add the email message content. So CDS and Dynamics 365 have their own email activity record, and that that is different to an Outlook email, just FYI. And the reason why we tend to use Dynamics 365 or the CDS email activity record is that it has advantages over Outlook. So in other words, you can define email templates. So any email template that you define in CDS can be applied to an email, and you can also have you can define the sender as well in Flow and Power Automate, and you can also set the regarding field value, which will then track that email back to the record that you've defined, basically. So I just wanted to make that clear in case some of you are wondering, oh, why isn't she using an Outlook email message? But that's why. Okay.
In this case, what we're doing is actually creating some traceability inside Dynamics for that email that you sent, right? Instead of just sending an email on Outlook and forget about it.
Yeah, and you'll see that in action once I show this. So the final actions that we have in here is to retrieve that document template record, because if you remember when we set up our action that generates that PDF in a custom connector, I was referencing the document template ID, but as part of our testing, I was, manually entering that document template. So if you need to automate it, you basically need to retrieve that document template so that you can use that ID. So this is what this action is doing. It's saying, hey, grab me all the Word templates, but the only Word template that I want is the one that has the name of this. And then that template is then going to be referenced in my custom action, which is this one. So this is then saying it's using the template ID from this action. And then in here, excuse me, it's using the invoice from my trigger. And then the next action is associating that PDF that's generated in this action. So now this is that encoded base64 string that you would have seen when we were testing the custom connector action. And then again, and simply saying use the invoice number as the file name and the subject. And I'm saying in here that I'm binding it to the email activity that we've created in here. So again, by using this connector, we're dynamically referencing all the different property values that the API request JSON payload expects. So like I mentioned, in here I was just copying and pasting, but in the real world, what you need to do is actually make sure that you reference those values. And then the very last one is to then send this email, because in this action, we're merely just creating an email activity. We haven't basically given it a command that it needs to send out. So this is what this action is doing. It's now saying, okay, go ahead and send that email, and that's it. Okay, so let me show you how it works in Dynamics 365. So here's my invoice, and my customer is Tony Stark. And in terms of the line items today, we have a couple of them. And so when the invoice is updated to paid, that should now trigger my flow in Power Automate. So I've clicked OK, and it's now updated that to paid. So if we head back to Power Automate and we look at the run history, we should see that the flow is executed. So just give it a few seconds. So here it is, it's kicked off. You can see as part of my testing to make sure that this would work for tonight, I did have a failed one, but I knew why it failed, so I fixed it. Okay, so here's my run history. So if I now expand this, this will be the flow that would have triggered once I updated this to paid. And we could see that it's ticked all the boxes. So if we wanted to have a look at the JSON response, we could do that. So that's one of the nice things about Flow, is that it will actually give you the details as well. And so if we now go back to the invoice and we have a look at activities, because I defined the regarding value of that email to the invoice, we should now, see that email, which is this one. So as Wagner pointed out, it gives you visibility to be able to see the email activity associated to the invoice by using the CDS or Dynamics 365 email activity record versus Outlook. It just gives you greater visibility of your emails in your Dynamics 365 instance. So we can see that it's sent from that queue of no reply. We can see that it's sent to the customer, and we can see that it is associated to the invoice. And that was pretty much based on my definition of the action. So if I just go back in here, so as I mentioned earlier, this is what it took care of. So that now this is what the email looks like. And then we can see that PDF has been automatically generated and associated to that email as an email attachment. So if I now click on this, just to show you what it looks like and to prove that it actually has happened. Why is this not opening? No, I've come so far and it's not letting me download it. Oh, here we go. It just needed a minute. Okay, so now if I click on open and, oh gosh, what is happening here? It keeps, okay. This is the PDF, and we can see that it's grabbed through the line items and it's pulled through that information. So again, that was based on a Word template that we've defined, which is pretty much these two actions in here. It's saying grab that particular Word template, and this is the Word template that's going to be used to generate the PDF. And yeah, that's all I have to share in terms of the presentation. So basically, if you want to extend the capabilities of something like Dynamics 365, you can through a custom connector. So if there are other applications out there that do have APIs that you can hook into, one way of being able to retrieve data from those applications is to possibly use a custom connector in the Power Platform. So yeah, and in this scenario with Dynamics 365, we can use Azure AD as the identity provider, which I think is pretty cool. I didn't know you could do this, but now I know that you can, and I think it's awesome. So I'm going to head back to my PowerPoint, and I'm going to open the floor to questions. Please be kind, and yeah, follow me if you want. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, feel free to do so. I do have a YouTube channel, so as Wagner mentioned, it's under my name. So if I just head back to my other browser, so I do have a blog, and don't crucify me, I do use Blogger. I'm not a WordPress or a Squarespace type of person. I'm a no-frills person. Anyone who knows me knows that I just use whatever. I still have a Hotmail email address as well that I still use. So yeah, I'm cool.
Do you have a GeoCities website?
No, I don't. Okay, so
she means not anymore.
So yeah, I do have a YouTube channel. So I actually have this all in blog posts. So I have part 1, part 2, and part 3. So part 2 is the one that goes into detail of how to create a custom connector for Dynamics 365. And there's also videos as well. So as I mentioned, I've got my YouTube channel. So if I just bring this up, yeah, so if you're not following me, please do follow me, because I do create my vlogs. And as Wagner said, I have my What the Flow vlogs, which helps people in the community to learn and create flows. And yeah, that's me.
Elaiza, do you mind putting the link for that blog post inside the
yeah, sure.
Q&A? Yeah, because there was one of the questions is, well, there is one question about CDS connector. I'll come to that in a minute. But one of the questions is also like the between the environments, why use some of those things, which I think you have on your blog post.
Yeah, correct. So, so in terms of that, the PDF API request, the only way to access that particular API request is basically you need to call that API. So by using a custom connector and you're using the post method, then that's how you can communicate with the API to get it to do what you want it to do, which is essentially PDF. Yeah, and then with the email attachment, one of our other Kiwi MVPs based here in New Zealand, his name is Lynn. I don't know if he's in the call today. He does have a workaround on how you can create an email attachment, but it means that you have to use the two different CDS connectors, whereas I wanted to use just one way of just doing it, and the way how I know that it will work is if you call that API request to perform that process for you. And so that's why I went through the custom connector route for the email attachment action. Like I could have used Lynn's solution, but I just didn't want to use two different CDS connectors, which is what you need to do if you want to successfully create an email attachment in Flow. But if you know how to create a custom connector, this is how you can do it in a single action, basically. Yeah.
Also, doing that, you have something that is reusable, because now we can apply that instead of having to learn about the API for everything. You can let people that doesn't understand the deep dive into Dynamics 365 to be able to use that and to integrate with Dynamics.
Yeah, exactly.
Thinking from my experience, my very first project with Logic Apps was on Dynamics. And for me, it was a huge learning curve to understand how Dynamics worked.
Yeah.
Right? And some things I actually was not able to do on that project. I have to instead of doing that, push it to the Dynamics developers to make us plugins, because we didn't have the ability to actually externalize that as the custom connectors at that point. Yeah. So doing that, you can say, okay, I'm doing this for this one project, but for the other project, I can allow the integration developers to work by themselves. So that's why I was so excited about the idea of the custom connectors.
Yeah,
right, and on that particular one.
Yeah, and for me, like as much as possible, like I do try to work out of the box with Dynamics 365 or CDS, but there are times where, like I mentioned earlier, it's not going to cut the cheese. It's not going to work because for whatever reason, it doesn't. And so when you need to evaluate what other options there are, you can do the custom development route, or you can do another route based on what's available today in the Microsoft world, and that's something that Power Automate can offer, or the Power Platform, where you can extend the capabilities of an application if you know what you want to do and have some guidance on how you can do it. Yeah, because
leverage from the existing APIs, because they invest in a lot on the APIs for Dynamics 365, Business Central. It's something that they're doing, doing a whole lot of work.
Yeah, correct. And even though, like I mentioned, that there are CDS connectors that exist today in Flow and Power Automate, but in the times where it's not going to meet what you want or what the customer wants, then evaluate what else is available that may give you or the customer what they actually are looking for. Go with that option. And so that's why I kind of went on this journey, because I knew about this PDF API request, but I wanted to understand, can we actually automate it? And there had been several blog posts on it, which I did read and reference in this 3-part series. And I just wanted to see what we could do, and this is what we can do. And It's really cool. I think it's really cool. And yeah, I was
I like
excited to share it with everyone because it just gives you another way of assessing what we can do today with the stack that we can use today, basically. And yeah, and I found, gosh, I found that from this learning journey, you know, more things that I could do with Azure, which I think is really cool. Previously, before Power Automate, I didn't know what you could do with Azure, but I'm starting to break down the pieces, which reminds me.
She's coming to the dark side.
Before we end the call, we do have an event this Friday. I know Wagner and our other colleague Thoranga is presenting as well. So in my session, which I'm doing with Rex, another colleague of ours in Wellington, we are going through, well, we're going to be sharing tips on Power Apps portals. And again, in here, we're doing something with Azure. So this time, what I'll be demonstrating is how you can download a calendar file from Power Apps portals. And basically, well, a sneak preview, you didn't hear it from me because I hope you're all going to be attending this Friday. In terms of like calling, well, downloading that calendar file, what I did in the flow was I've actually configured it where it's going to call that file that would have been generated beforehand, and it's stored in an Azure blob container. So then as part of the flow in this demonstration that you'll see is that the flow is going to be basically retrieving that calendar file from the Azure blob container.
Storage.
Yeah, and it's going to download locally on that public end user's device. So whether it's their laptop, phone, iPad, it will just download basically for them. And
one of the questions that we had here, I know that we're going a little bit over time, but just so to make sure, because I think that was the biggest question that they have. Do we need anything special to connect to CDS? What is the connection to CDS looks like on the Power Automate?
So if you have a Dynamics 365 enterprise license, it gives you entitlements to CDS. If you don't have Dynamics 365, I don't want to say 100. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 80% sure that based on your Power Apps license, so there's a Power Apps per user plan, and then there's a Power Apps per app plan. I think it gives you allowance to access data from
one CDS environment.
CDS, but in terms of like when you configure inflow, so let me just create a brand new action in here.
You just need to share it again because I was just I put the questions on the slide, but you just share it again. There we go.
Okay. So as soon as I type in Common Data Service, there'll be a couple of options. So the first one is the current environment connector, and then there's another one that just doesn't have current environment connector in brackets. So this one where it says current environment in brackets, this is the connector that you want to use when you are working with solutions. So what I mentioned earlier is solutions in the CDS world is basically a way of how you can package your customizations and configuration for that particular environment, that instance. And so by using the current environment connector, it means that your flow will live in that solution. So then when you export it and import it, it'll work fine. Now,
you don't need to reconfigure.
Well, kind of, not quite, because
not for the CDS, not for the CDS point of view, right? It knows at least what is the organization, what is those things that come with the Dynamics 365 before.
Yeah, the only thing that you do need to reestablish after you do a deployment into your target environment like UAT is the connector. So what I mean by that is when you import it, it won't ask you, but basically you'll know that you need to just reconnect.
Re-authenticate.
Yeah, but what the product team is going to be releasing, and I think it's in private preview at the moment, is it's called, I think they're calling it the modern solution import. So basically that goes away. It's gonna then, as part of your import, it will show you the connections. Let me just find it. Blog post on it, I believe. Okay, I'll share this in the group chat. Okay, so this is what I'm referring to. So basically this is coming where now when you import your solution, it's going to ask you for the connection. And so then when you click next, it'll basically go through all of your flows that have this connector, and it's going to use that connection that you select. So that's cool. That's coming. And I'm looking forward to that, because at the moment when we do deployments for customers, it's a bit of overhead that we have to account for.
It's manually, you have to manually go to each one of them and re-authenticate.
Yeah.
And sometimes put other configurations and stuff. Cool. So the other question that we had to finish for today was why we're doing the app registration. My understanding of that was the API requires OAuth.
Yes, that's correct. And so as part of the app registration, it's basically a way of being able to authenticate with Dynamics 365 through Azure AD as the identity provider. I'm not sure what would happen in the context of other applications. So I have done it with Spotify. So I do have a blog post on how to create a custom connector with Spotify. And obviously with that one, we're not using Azure AD, we're using
API keys?
Yes, API keys. I was going to say tokens, and I was like, is that the same thing?
So is it correct to say that in this particular instance, what it's doing is acting as though it were a service account in the old on-prem world?
Yeah, correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're giving that service account permissions to call the Dynamics 365 interface or the APIs. And so it can then run on the, oh gosh, it was called Flow, now it's called Power Apps. There we go.
Power Automate.
Power Automate, sorry.
Even some of Microsoft documentation still calls it Flow.
Yeah, I know.
And the portal is flow.microsoft.co. So it's okay, man.
Sweet. So cool. So that's what it's in essence doing, right? It's giving the Power Automate application runtime permissions to call your Dynamics 365 instance.
Yes, that's right.
And also, I think just worthy of note is when you authorize that on behalf of the whole organization, when you logged in as the ACSUG demo account that you created, that action I think is only applicable when you are a domain admin or at least have escalated rights within the AD. If you're a user and you don't have those rights, you can't actually accept that type of service account on behalf of the organization. You need an individual one. Or your administrator needs to do it for you.
Yeah, should I need to go back and update my blog then just to include that note. I
stand to be corrected, but yeah, if you had a user account that was just a casual user within your tenancy, they may not be able to perform that action.
Yeah, I might did I test it? I feel like I have. Actually. Let me write a note.
Yeah, so prereq is there is another question here, and I'm quite aware that you're running out of time. There are any prerequisites or limitations that we need to be aware of with the custom connector?
Yeah, so with your custom connector, when you create it in your source environment, so in other words, dev, it'll live in there. So what you need to do is associate it to a solution. So if I just go back in here and just pick one of them. there's an option in here called custom connector. And so basically you add it to your solution so that when that solution is exported, so in other words, you've packaged everything up and you deploy in your target environment, you can then establish that custom connector and wire things up, and then it'll work in that environment. And that's pretty much like, yeah, what you would do.
And that's because of the we are doing that on the context of D365, and because of that, the D365 license already have the permission to use custom connector.
Yeah, and if you think back to when I was doing the configuration of that custom connector, so let me just go back. When we were defining the host, is that what it was called? Hang on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you see how this is referencing my source Dynamics 365 instance. So in other words, pretend this is dev. So when you do your deployment in your target instance, you would need to update this to point to that target Dynamics 365 URL. And then I think that applies the same with your actions as well, because in here, again, it's referencing
that environment. Oh,
yeah,
that endpoint.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be improvements made. They might have mentioned it, and I probably maybe wasn't listening at the time. But yeah, I'm sure they know that this is something that is, well, the way it works right now, and it's probably maybe something on their to-do list. So when I say they, as in like the product team, maybe it's something that they're going to improve on. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was thinking that maybe the question here was about the licensing, but from D365 you don't need an extra license, and if you're doing custom connectors by yourself, it's kind of a premium feature, right, on Power Automate?
Yeah, because when we performed the test, right, it was saying basically I need to have a connection, so it created a connection for my user, and because my user is a licensed user, it worked fine.
If not, then it would wouldn't go.
Yeah,
cool.
Correct.
All right. I don't think there is other questions here.
I see an interesting little toggle box. What does the Swagger editor do?
Don't go there, man. It's literally that. You can actually change it.
Yeah.
See,
Nice.
they have a good a Swagger editor and not use it that on API management.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
Oh, well, maybe the teams will talk one day.
Well, I just want to say thanks. I hope you guys found it useful. Yeah, I was like, ooh, Azure community. I've never spoken to them before, but thanks, Wagner, for the encouragement, and I've actually quite enjoyed it. You guys are pretty awesome.
Thank you.
You've done really well.
Yes, thanks very much for joining us and sharing that, because it's not something that we see every day, right? Yeah. But it's being on the other side of the coin, trying to do those integrations and stuff, is quite interesting to understand how that works and how we can leverage the things that sometimes might be simpler and simpler in quotes, like Power Automate, instead of having to state all of that in Azure, making sure that there is a level of parity of of functionality on that is also quite important.
Yeah.
Because I think as I saw Taranga on the line, and one of the discussions that we always had was what we're going to be using. Are we using Power Automate? Are we using Logic Apps? Are we using this? Are we using that? So understand where this the lay of the land to make the choice wisely is a good thing.
Yeah. On that note, I'm pretty sure those of you in the Azure community would know of him. So Kent Weir. So he actually has I think it's a Udemy course that talks about the difference between Logic Apps and Power Automate and when you would use it. So I I have registered for it. I haven't finished it. It's on my to-do list, but yeah, I quite like the course. It's pretty good. It's nicely well laid out. So if that's something that you guys are interested in, yeah.
Lots of people know Kent from from his BizTalk days.
Yeah.
So Kent used to be a BizTalk MVP, then an integration MVP, then Azure MVP, then business solutions MVP after he went to the flow side of the force.
Yeah. Oh look, it's on special as well. So I'm just gonna paste it in the chat.
Yes, like the Logic Abscessus Flow for a whole year was my most read blog.
Wow,
so
really?
just to see how much people asking that question.
Yeah.
Well, it's 6:47, so just to show that we actually was having so much of a good conversation that even forgot about the time.
Yeah.
But probably closing for today. Thanks again, Elaiza. Was really good, and hope everyone else that was in the line enjoyed. As soon as I get everything organized, I'm going to be posting that on the YouTube channel and let everyone know. Okay.
Well,
See you,
thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Bye.
Okay, I stopped sharing.